So I can. Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for coming on my show, the Inform Forum, which is on YouTube. And that's it. We do have a Twitter, or I do have a Twitter. Anyway,
Thank you for having me.
yeah, thanks for coming on my show. And thank you all for watching in the future. Maybe the 15 subscribers I have. I'm with, I forget your name. I think it's Darryl.
Darryl Hendricks.
Okay, yeah. Why don't you tell everyone who you are and why I have you on my show?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Darryl Hendricks, and I'm running for the U.S. House of Representatives for the districts for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, District 7.
Cool.
And I come into this with a background. I'm new to the scene, very similar to a lot of new Democrats you're seeing in office. I'm a byproduct of a failed system, and I have a viewpoint on how to get out of there. So I don't come from money. I've had to kind of grind my way through to own a business. My wife Lucy and I, we own a business in Westchester, New York. We commute to and from every day. We have two sons. CJ, our three-year-old, has autism, as well as myself. I'm a unique candidate in that I have Asperger's, ADHD, and dyslexia. I'm a lot of my education, a lot of where I come from has been. I'm a byproduct of the shared economy. I'm a byproduct of a shared capitalist economy, and my goal is to. My goal in running for office is to have the United States lead the rest of the world into the third industrial revolution, providing a carbon zero footprint for the entire world, stopping climate change and stopping from China from becoming the world's next superpower. My number one goal is to stop climate change. A lot of my ideas and policy ideas come not from what a lot of politicians are talking about now, which I feel is coming from a failed system, a second industrial revolution ideology, even when it comes to education, foreign policy, everything. So every answer that I'm giving you or anybody else during this campaign is coming from a third industrial revolution thought process. I don't want to focus on the issues. I want to focus on solutions. And I feel like a lot of what we're seeing in our country today is a lot of people arguing and being divisive and being tribal because our system is broken. And if you look at where the Occupy Wall Street movement was years ago, where the Tea Party movement was years ago, you kind of see both of those political energies rising through politics now.
Yeah.
And if we're not careful, we're going to kind of repeat history. If you look at how we entered into World War II, capitalism went unchecked. The middle class got hurt, and there was a lot of strife and turmoil worldwide. And I feel like we're kind of, in a sense, repeating history. And I think capitalism in its current form hasn't really worked for a lot of Americans because it's become what Bernie Sanders has kind of described as more of an oligarchical-based system, where special interests are kind of pulling the strings. I feel like if we're going to move forward with a carbon zero blueprint, we have to change the way we approach capitalism. And my opinion is that every economic system that you see out there is a hybrid. And if we use aspects of the shared economy and social programs to help protect those who need the help in our society, we can actually help modernize and fix capitalism to make it work in the way that it was designed to do for our country.
Yeah, I mean, basically. For me, I live right outside of Philadelphia in the suburbs, but I actually work in Old City, Philadelphia. And I can't tell you how many veterans I see that are homeless.
Yes.
Outside of a Wawa that I get coffee at on my lunch break, or tea, depending on the day. Or just homeless people. And I don't blame anyone for being homeless, but I do blame the system.
Yeah.
And that, I think the economic message is the strongest because I don't care what someone says. I mean, maybe that's a little bit of privileged thinking, but I don't really care what a candidate says if they're a dick or whatever it is. It's not really about that. It's where they stand. It's where they come from an issue. It's how they understand and the framing of things too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the fundamental misunderstanding when it comes to so-called progressive policies, whether it's like just economic based message or like things regarding the Green New Deal or Medicare for all, or even free college and like free childcare for like preschool age kids, like it's the framing of things. And it sounds like you might have some kind of an understanding of how these things are paid for.
Well,
Um,
I do a
I
lot
say
of research.
that ironically because I understand how they could be paid for.
Right.
But
Just as one prime example, the United States government every year annually spends $75 billion on research on just oil and gas alone, just research and development. If we keep in mind, and I forgot to also mention, a lot of my political or my campaign message comes from Jeremy Rifkin's model of the third industrial revolution. And what that means is, when we go carbon zero, we also have to factor in that the rest of the world, including developing nations, have to be on this model in order to be able to get this. So when we think of trade deals, when we think of how we're digitalizing our infrastructure, we have to talk to the outside world. And if we consider that a lot of our policies are going in the opposite direction, it makes it very hard to get onto that carbon zero blueprint. So the first step in this process, in my opinion, is to digitalize our entire infrastructure. So Premier Lee, which is I don't remember his title, but he was the head of infrastructure for China, read Jeremy Rifkin's book 4 years ago and presented it to President Xi. And President Xi determined that this was the one way that they were going to defeat the United States economically. They were going to beat us to carbon zero. They have the world's first solar paneled highway. They decided they were going to digitalize their entire infrastructure in 5 years. So, and the reason why that's important is when we think of buying and selling energy on an infrastructure, we need to digitalize that in order to do that. And we don't have that. And we look at our Commonwealth, like Pennsylvania, we fall underneath the standardization for a digitalized infrastructure as a state. And people don't recognize that. And that's the first step we have to make in being able to get to that carbon zero footprint. So my hope is to offer some of the analytics and kind of foundational blueprint that we can add to the Green New Deal to be able to get this done. And that alone, if we just took that $75 billion to pay for just to digitalize just a portion of our country to show how we can do this, and think of the ton of jobs that come from that. If a small example would be like developing nations would have an easier time getting into a carbon zero blueprint because they kind of skip over that second industrial revolution platform. They can just build up versus us who have to scale down and then build the new. So think of the type of jobs that we're going to have to do for this. This can't be automated. You're not going to have machines building windmills and solar panels. You're not going to have them putting in the digitalized infrastructure to be able to do that. So in China right now, Chinese citizens have a better, or nationals have a better ability to buy and sell their green energy on a digitalized infrastructure than Pennsylvanians do and most Americans do. And that's, and I don't mean to cut you off, but that's one of the key factors for having energy become at a zero marginal cost. Because you don't want to just go carbon zero, in my opinion. You want energy to be at a zero marginal cost. You want energy independence. You don't want to have the system profit off of energy, because if we look at how that's tainted our viewpoint in the foreign policy, look at all the proxy wars that we're involved in the Middle East because of the petrodollar. If you think of the allies that we've joined forces with, like Saudi Arabia, most of the hijackers from 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Why are we doing deals with them? They are one of the worst human rights violators in the world. Why are we doing, and that's not just Trump, that's everybody. And if we look at people who accept money from special interests from that, like who accept money from the likes of the Carlyle Group, which my opponent Susan Wild has accepted money from, we generally tend to see a pattern developing. And if you look at the committees that they sit in, $10,000 plus doesn't seem like that much of amount of money to give to a candidate when they're raising $3 million on a national campaign. But if you look at all the members of the committees they sit in, millions of dollars worth of donations amongst those committees in the House.
And they create, like, I don't want to say cohorts, but like they create little clubs in those committees. So they make alliances with someone else saying, oh, you've taken a lot of money from this person. So have I. So let's make sure we put legislation together that won't alienate this company. And then you see, like, just a trend of things like that. And this is why, like, it is so important to follow the money when it comes to anyone, whether it's someone running for local county council or yeah, that's really about it, because judges are
Right.
a little different.
Right.
Not entirely, but
and the interesting thing is you don't even really need to raise that amount of money when you factor in the type of technological advancements we have there and the shared economy. If you look at how much, where all that money goes to, where does my opponent got most of her donations from outside of the Commonwealth, over 90%. You know, if you look at if you go on to, if you if you go into research where she spent that money, a lot of it was on television advertisements and negative marketing towards her opponents. So she was taking money from hardworking Americans that are suffering to spend money to trash their opponent, when she could have been using ideas to unify people, work on different sources of collaboration and shared economy to be able to spread her message without even raising money. As an example, she raised less money in the primary and still won. You know, like, you know, if you look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she raised a fraction of what Joe Crowley won, and she won. It's about grassroots organization. It's about connecting yourself to the people. It's literally about people versus money, which is why those members of the House have more, they're present to more committee hearings than members who accept money from special interests, who are out spending most of their time raising money for their future campaigns or their next campaign. So I think whenever I say to people, follow the money, I say, don't think of this as a Democrat or Republican thing. This is about, you know, saving our planet, saving our country. And when you do that, you almost have, in a sense, have to take an autopsy, and I hate to use that term, of why we are where we are. And a little small example is that I had a meeting I don't know if I should be saying this in public, but whatever. I gave my first public speak at a Democratic function a couple weeks ago, and I sat down, and there was a seat in between me and someone else who was running for a local office. And I don't even think she realized she did this when I sat down to the seat in between her. She sat down, and Lucy, my wife, sat down next to me, and without her even knowing what I was running for, she looked at me with her mouth open, and I got the oh so familiar, let me pull my wallet that's sitting close to him away from him with my mouth open and hug it and lean away from him. I'm sorry, I'm like leaning away from the screen. Yeah. And Lucy, my wife, saw that, and she's like, are you kidding me? And every time I've walked into those meetings, when I stood up and I talked about how I've been racially profiled by police, and I have family members who are police officers, so I love the police, but it still doesn't change the fact that we have these issues, you know, that because of that I've grown up as a, you know, considering how I went through the educational system with my quote unquote disabilities, I was often referred to as a retard. I should have been a statistic. You know, I look at some of my family members who, you know, are still in jail because of drugs and because of everything else redlining provided for the metaphorical prisons that were put in place after the New Deal. And, you know, when we think about like how we move forward in this process, we have to remember when we're taking this metaphorical autopsy, not to repeat the same mistakes we made with the New Deal. The New Deal helped a lot of Americans, but it also hurt a lot of Americans with redlining alone. And a lot of those principles are still in place to this day. So when we think of the Green New Deal, and when they talk about human rights and civil rights as being a part of that, I really feel that they're taking what I'm saying into heart. And I really think the Green New Deal has a lot to offer for people. And I just, you know, it's sad to me that, you know, it's getting broken apart in the way that it is, and it's not getting the type of support across the board when most of Americans agree with it. 80% of Americans agree with it. 64% of conservatives agreeing with the green energy economy. I talk to Trump supporters and veterans, and I say, hey, you can think climate change is like ridiculous. You can think it wouldn't even matter and it's not even real. But let's talk about national security. Let's talk about energy independence, and let's talk about smart infrastructure. And I used to joke with some of the hardened Trump supporters that we deal with in the campaign or debating when they would say, "Oh, climate change is a joke." And I said, you know what? If you took your mouth and you put it behind the back of a 1980 Chevy and see how long you can do that, I think you'd die pretty quick. What do you think? And they'd start laughing. I'm like, just because you think climate change is a joke doesn't mean that it affects people health-wise. Like, if you think of the amount of people who are diagnosed with preventable diseases because of the type of energy resources that we have, when you get, I don't know if Pennsylvanians got this alert, but a couple months ago, we were getting ozone alerts because of the what do you call it, the smoke coming across the country from the fires in California.
Yeah.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, like we need to rethink about energy, and we also have to think about energy independence. Why should I have to pay for something that is given to me naturally? Like, we don't pay for the sun, we don't pay for wind. We shouldn't have to pay for energy if we derive it from those two resources. And
Right.
you know, I think we should also add to this climate change debate how it can improve national security. Like I say, when you think of Jeremy Rifkin's model on going carbon zero, every single house will be on its own individual node. And what that means is, I'm not a military, I don't have a military background, but from what little I've researched, if a nuclear bomb were to detonate over our atmosphere, if we think of how that would affect all the electronic systems in our country and the aftermath, that would actually almost yield a greater aftermath in terms of death than the actual event. And if you think about every house being on its own individual node from a national security standpoint, that eliminates that threat right off the bat. You know, like going carbon zero is not just about climate change, it's about national security. And it's about also competing against the Chinese, who are beating us to the chase. And the last I checked, China has facial recognition technology with all their citizens. They're securing all the waterways. Like, for instance, Pakistan, I believe it's Pakistan. They went to them and they said, we'll build you the biggest port in the world. We know you can't pay for it, but we can use your port and put our battleships and all of our cargo ships there for the next 100 years, right? That's cool. They're doing that along the entire coast. They're trying to reopen the old Silk Road. While we're a part of the proxy wars in Africa, and China's building industry and development in Africa, because a lot of the resources that we need for that carbon zero, they come from Africa. You know, so we need to rethink about you know, how we're tackling this approach across the board, in my opinion. So I hope to add to that debate.
Sounds cool. I mean, I'm trying to think of like a question to ask you, and I'm like,
I know I'm sorry.
it's
You know,
okay.
and I guess I'm really excited because, you know, I understand what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said when she was first running, about like, when you're first running and you hear a party telling you that they want you to join, they're here for you. You fit the category of the people that they're trying to help. And then you step up and you try to join that movement, and they tell you, shh, no, go back to your seat, wait your turn. No, don't ruffle that feather, don't unturn that stone. You know, and they put her down because of her background. She is right now one of the most effective members in the House. And
Yeah.
what was she 2 years ago? A bartender. So when we talk about experience, I feel like people who come from these communities that are hurting the most have the most added value in this fight. And that's not to knock people.
I agree. I think, I mean, I don't really have much of a background in politics outside of loving independent media and becoming corrupt in that sense, or corrupted in that sense. I would say converted, but some would say corrupted. But
Right.
I know I said corrupted, but I mean converted.
I know. Yeah, I know.
Either way. I'm saying corrupted in an ironic sense, I think. I don't know. But like, God, I was saying something and I know it was important somewhat.
That happens to me every day. Can I give it like a quick example of something?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to jump. My brain is like bouncing. I'm really enjoying talking about this. If we take education, for example, we kind of, you know, if we think of the psychological aspects of how we can reapproach education, that can have a huge effect on our future generation. As an example, if we look at the two leading countries in education, I believe it's South Korea and I want to say Finland. They go back.
Yeah.
They go back and forth between 1 and 2, but they take a different approach to education. What I mean by, they don't just throw money at the issue. They try to change consciousness for future generations to prepare them for this digitalized carbon zero shared economy platform. And what that would look like is a classroom of, if we think of the second industrial revolution, we need to prepare our workforce for factory line workers. We needed people to not necessarily ask questions, but do the manual labor. So we modeled our educational system based on that. Even the grading systems in our school are the same that we do for our manufacturing and agricultural industries. Grade A, grade B, and so on and so forth. That's vertical integration of power. The teacher staying at the front, dictating. If you have to ask a question, you have to raise your hand. You can't share your answers with the other student that might be struggling. And if you're considered sharing that information, that's called cheating. And that's the second industrial revolution, vertical power integration. And if we think of the consciousness level of that, we're talking about having a society like where if you go down New York City on Fifth Avenue in front of Trump Tower, you'll see the biggest homeless population in the United States kind of situated around that area. You know, you see some of the most expensive malls in America, and behind their parking lots in the woods are homeless people sleeping. And to your point, like 46% of homeless people are veterans. You know, if we factor in that a lot of people who are homeless are actually fully employed, we have people who work at CVS, and then instead of going to a shelter, which is dangerous, they go into the woods. You know, it's I'm going back and forth with picking my uncle up from homeless shelters because he doesn't want to go in there. And whenever he goes in there, he gets jumped, and he doesn't want the help. He feels that the system has failed him, and there's no support for people who have substance abuse issues. You know, we're treating this as though it's a prisonable offense as opposed to a crisis that we're dealing with because of a failed system. And the last time I talked to an elected official who was running for another office, my main pitch into getting into politics was not just climate change, but was dealing with the homelessness. And I would go around in Stroudsburg and East Stroudsburg and see them sleeping in the woods. And I went in and we would give them food and water. And when I went to, you know, go to the Monroe County Democratic Party meeting and say this, they gave me kind of some people to talk to. And I ended up going to the police commissioner's hearing to talk about this. And before I went there, you know, the candidate that called me said, well, you know, I'm really kind of new at this, but from my impression, they're junkies. And I said, well, let me correct you. They're veterans. They're people who are suffering from pain. They're Americans. We need to help them. Our system is failing them. You're an elected official. That's not a sufficient enough answer. I didn't say that, but my blood was boiling. And then she went on to tell me about how she was running for the Senate. I'm like, all right, I'm done.
Piece of shit.
So I then went to the police commissioner hearing that she suggested I went to, and they ignored me. They didn't even look at me. So I got up in the end and I said, you know what's interesting? When I watch the television, I'm told to be afraid of all of you people because you racially profile a person like myself. And I said that to kind of like get them to like listen to me because I was the only civilian in the entire room. So they finally stopped and they looked at me open mouthed and I said, now that I have your attention, I'd like to address homelessness in the area. And I kind of got the runaround, and I really felt that nothing really came out of that. And when I went to, and we had like a group meeting a week after where I met with the chief of police and Street to Feet. You know, it almost seemed like I was like, all right, finally something is moving in the right direction. But then when I spoke to one of the volunteers there, she said, you know, one of the main ways to fix the system is to change it, because right now the system isn't really working for people that are homeless. And that really gave me one of the ideas to run for office. And I feel like now's the time for everybody to be involved. And if Americans don't get involved, that void will be filled with special interests, you know, and that's kind of what's going on now. If you think about where my generation, millennials, were 2 to 3 years ago, we were searching for invisible Pokemon characters in Central Park and other areas. And now what are the young people of America doing? We're storming the Capitol, demanding action on climate change. We actually found something that we are vested in, that we have a vested interest in, because we felt that politics didn't talk to people like us. And when I hear people like Joe Biden get on and say the millennials need to suck it up, I say to myself, I understand where he's coming from as an old person who doesn't understand young people. I don't think he's a bad guy, but he totally misgauged that one. He doesn't understand what millennials are going through. And he doesn't understand what it's like to come out of college with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt with an economy that's failing. And one thing to keep in mind, if fossil fuels peaked in productivity in 2008 and the market's crashing, where in aftermath of that, we're still figuring out how to deal with the after effects of that blowout. We're not dealing with the root cause. So when we're tackling this issue, I would like to hear more with for instance, the minimum wage debate. Should we raise the minimum wage? Absolutely, but that doesn't stop the cost of the increase of the cost of living. You know, if we think of fossil fuels, every time, we think of fossil fuels, we shouldn't just think of how we power our buildings and our cars. We need to think of makeup and tires and synthetic fiber. 90% of our economy is based off of fossil fuels. So if we're going to pull that element out, we have to pull other elements in. And I'm excited about those prospects, because if we think of the first and second industrial revolutions, we used a natural resource as a main energy driver. This is the first time where it wouldn't be that way. So what I would suggest is using a natural resource in cannabis as it's a carbon negative, what people don't understand. Cannabis is a carbon negative, not a carbon neutral. Right. But if we're talking about hempcrete as an example, hempcrete, if you acted it into concrete, it would actually eat carbons in our atmosphere. So when we're talking about repurposing our infrastructure, yes, we have to digitalize it, but we also have to have buildings that eat carbon, which will also help us with that 12-year time frame. So there's a lot of things out there that we can do. There are recycling plants who are using the waste, extracting it, and using it as like super fertilizer. so we don't have to use genetically modified seeds and growing our crops. We look at companies like Memphis Meats. I'm a vegan, so to speak, so I don't eat meat. But when we look at, that's the other thing that we don't talk enough about the climate change debate, that animal agriculture is the second leading cause of climate change. And when we think of Pennsylvania and we think of, how our state operates, economically, we can add in different solutions. As an example, cannabis is a natural resource we can produce. Memphis Meats, I don't know if you heard of that company. They're a company that actually extracts stem cells from animals so they don't slaughter them to reproduce meat. And when people are like, well, I would never eat meat from a test tube. But I'm like, do you know what they do to those cows? They sit up to feces, their waste and feces, and then they use ammonia to disinfect the meat when they produce it. And that sounds kind of gross, but that test tube meat sounds a lot more delicious than the latter. So, but there's a lot of opportunity we have to add to this debate. And I feel like, I feel like this second wave of people who are fighting for this climate change debate coming on should really tackle this from this perspective. And I hope to create a grassroots movement to add on to that Green New Deal debate and adding these other new ideas to it. Because I feel like we can get there so quick if we just kind of unified as a country. And if we keep in fact that 64% of conservatives agree with the green economy platform and 80% of Americans agree with this Green New Deal, there's an actual foundation in place to build unity within our country. Because the way that the current politics are going, we're not going to be able to get to that carbon zero blueprint because we are so divided. But I think if we actually start to offer some of these new types of conversations to conservatives, kind of in which the way Hillary Clinton never did in 2016 election, and showing, coal is going away in the future, but we still need a lot of these manufacturing like steel and aluminum plants to be able to build this new platform, this new carbon zero platform. And we have another 2 to 3 decades of the height of this old industrial infrastructure to be able to have people retire accordingly and to train our future generations for this new format. If the Democratic Party would have, formatted their conversation that way in 2016 and beforehand, we probably wouldn't have had a lot of people leave our party and vote for Donald Trump. Meaning in the middle of the country, the fact that Hillary Clinton cut out billboards to some of these states instead of visiting them herself is proof to my point. There's a detachment to the people, and candidates generally follow the money. And if we look at our current election or future presidential election coming up, they're estimating it's going to cost close to $6 billion. Do you know how many people that can feed? And if we think of marginal efficiency with a shared economy, you don't need to spend nearly that amount of money to be able to run an effective campaign. It's a waste of money.
Why, I think it's really important to have I'm totally a Bernie bro, if you want to call it that. But that's why it's really important to actually have a plan to actually deal with potentially public financing of elections.
Yeah.
Whether that's through a voucher or whatever. And then it's also important to make elections fair.
Right.
With something like ranked choice voting.
Right.
Because right now they're not. And that's
exactly.
why, I'm really happy at a national level there's been some conversation about that because of Howard Schitz. I call him Howard Schitz. Deciding to potentially run if the Democratic Party nominates someone far left, which at this point they're all quote
progress. Everybody's progressive now, right? Can I say one thing, because my ADD kicked in and I forgot to finish a point that I was saying earlier about education in terms of that old format. Bring it up to your current point with Howard Schultz. If we think of our current format, vertical integration of power, how you change that would be a classroom of a group of students sitting in groups of 6 at a table with an iPad in the middle. The teacher will act as a facilitator and say, as a collective group, we're going to figure out what the nutritional density of the soil is in this particular zip code. Figure it out. And they help them. And what that means is, if you look at YouTube as an example, I have certain hobbies, and I like watching certain videos on YouTube, like ghost hunting. And there's certain ghost hunters who go out, and instead of just hoarding all their viewers to themselves, they say, well, if I collaborate with another ghost hunter or another YouTube personality, we can both get more viewers and get more money if we collaborated together. We're helping each other out and be more profitable than we would individually. It almost promotes a type of philanthropic ideology when we think of capitalism, which is something that we've been missing from the equation. How do we put the well-being of our planet and of our people before profit? And I think if you look at millennials, most millennials work for nonprofits because they have that philanthropic bone in their body. So, I feel like when we talk about a third industrial revolution platform, it's all about collaboration and lateral power. It's about power to the people, and it's modernizing and it's fixing capitalism in a way where we wouldn't have special interests they wouldn't have the ability or the room to kind of check in and take advantage of the system and the people. So that's like one approach just to education alone. And that's one approach that Finland and South Korea are using. And that's why their educational systems rank higher. But they also spend less than we do. I know they're a quarter size of like our country, but they spend less per capita per student because they use marginal efficiency in their models. We don't. And Adam Smith, who created the King's, the whole concept of capitalism never factored marginal efficiency into that equation. And as an example, you see, the system that we have now, you'll see candidates who will have no bones about taking money from the Carlyle Group, but then will also at the same time take money from the environmental community as well. Because to them, it's all about the money. It's not about what's the right thing to do. And I don't necessarily fault them for that because they're a byproduct of our system. But now that we're having this conversation and now that they're in the know, now that's a litmus test, in my opinion. So, I follow the money.
Yeah.
In my opinion. So,
so there's two questions I want to ask you. So we talked about homelessness a lot. What would be a way to solve that crisis? Because it honestly is a crisis.
I was homeless at one point in my life. For a couple months. It wasn't for a long time. And I was when I was becoming a personal trainer, and I lived out of the back of my truck, and I went down to do my floor shifts, and I would shave and shower. Nobody knew. And I was too prideful to try to ask money out of a cup, because the first time I did that, someone kicked the cup and told me to get excuse the language, a fucking job. I didn't have a drug addiction. The one thing that helped me get through that issue was my cat, Jerry. When I think of homelessness and I think of how they're forgotten people in our society, and I think about how, if college students who have an advantage find no value in this current system, because it's like starting on the finish line already losing the race. Or it's like, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put it, it's like expecting people to pull themselves up with their bootstraps when they don't even have boots to pull themselves up with. Right. So one of my thought processes is to use the shared economy. One of the ghost hunters, the reason why I got into ghost hunting on YouTube is one of the celebrities I follow on YouTube was homeless, and he would sleep in abandoned homes, and he had his iPhone. He would just hear things in the night, and he would start filming. He gained a following and started making money off of YouTube. He's a byproduct of the shared economy. I'm a byproduct of a shared economy. I've never read a book in my life because of my dyslexia, ADHD, and Asperger's. I was often referred to as a retard most of my life. So I studied Stanford's level 1 physics course online because they offer it for free. I know emergence theory, and I can tell you about a tetrahedra. I can talk about advanced things that I normally wouldn't have had access to because of the shared economy. And if we think of the shared economy, there's a guy who lost his job not too long ago, and his main skill was making custom knives, which if you think about our current economy, how could he do that? How could he profit off of that? So he started making custom knives and selling them on Amazon. He started selling them on YouTube, and now he's, I believe, living in Alaska making 6 figures. If we look at like how the shared economy has affected places like the Poconos, Airbnb has put a tremendous hurt on the hotel and retail business in our area. If you look at our malls, people don't go to the malls to buy stuff anymore. They go to eat food, go to the movies, and to work out. I just realized that was the thing that people actually work out in malls, by the way. I don't know why, but I just realized that was the thing.
They do. It's very, very strange to me.
But they do.
I don't often go to the mall. I live not far from the biggest mall in America now.
Right. And
people work out there before it opens, which is so odd.
Right. So if you think of, and specifically answering your question, the homeless issue, if we think of India as a byproduct, or as an example, most people in India had no access to energy because of the poverty issue in India. Now, more people have access to green energy and solar panel technology than Americans do. If you're living in a hut in India, you have access to the internet and you have access to the shared economy. you have a way as a quote unquote have not to be able to even out the playing field. And I would hope that we introduce these thought processes as we're talking to. That's what I want to do as a grassroots movement with our campaign. Talk to homeless population, get them re-engaged into the conversation, find a way to get them registered to vote, get them involved in canvassing. Because when you talk to homeless people, especially veterans, they're angry at the system. Just like the Occupy Wall Street was, just like the Tea Party movement was. They both were, there's a huge opportunity here. The system is not going to provide for them. Once you get into office, one other thing that you can do is to change drug policy, prison reform, ending the war on drugs, and finding a way for these people to access those resources. I can't do that now because I'm not in government, but what I can do as a private citizen is to help share the shared economy with them and get them jobs from that aspect, to share their skill set to the rest of the world. And if you look at Invisible People, who is someone that I've been following, a nonprofit I've been following, they help talk to homeless people and actually make the situation more human and more approachable to people who weren't necessarily paying attention to before. And they're accessing resources and jobs because of that. So if I am elected into office, I would use those other strategies. But until then, I'm using the shared economy and grassroots organizing to be able to get them jobs. And I think, that's what we should do. And as private citizens, show them that they actually have value, find skill sets that they can use to be able to promote it on social media to get them a job. That's the way of the world. And if you look at the way that we're fighting that, if we don't change that platform, we're going to be like the Poconos. We're going to be the Sears, who are now out of business, the Bon-Ton store. If you look at, for every one Zip card that is put on the road, it takes 15 cars out of manufacturing. Millennials don't want to buy cars because they don't see value in buying something
even that. We can't afford it.
Right.
And it's just ridiculous. But
can I just say one last thing before you? And one other thing too. One last thing is, with the Green New Deal, if you talk about jobs training programs, if you do it the right way, homeless people can be trained to put the sensors into this digitalized infrastructure. In Germany, they have driverless cars, but they're training the truck drivers to build the chips to ensure that their economy doesn't fall. So as a part of this Green New Deal, I would hope that we would employ homeless people and give opportunity to people without job because we're talking about a living actual wage there, an actual salary. So, I think that should also be added into the Green New Deal debate as well too.
Higher in the Green New Deal.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother issue because there's contentions that I've come into contact with people that are in unions currently. And a $15 minimum wage of a federally guaranteed job is actually not enough.
Right.
But the other thing,
if you factor, you need to make $21 an hour with no debt to be able to sustain yourself as a single person in the poorest community in the United States of America. $15 an hour doesn't cut it because we don't address as a country the cost of the rise of living in the United States. And part of that is tied to fossil fuels. And the fact that we're a part of a second industrial revolution format in which its heightened productivity sailed away in 2008, years ago.
Yeah, basically. So I want to make this last question very short because I'm giving myself like a minute.
Sure. Yeah.
The last question is, your district, or in your district, or even near your district, is there a DSA chapter that you've tried to reach out to or connected to?
No. After my experience dealing with local politics and politicians, I actually got really jaded and I almost walked away from politics to begin with. And when we think of the one thing, if people ask me what's the one thing that I'm worried about dealing with when I get into government, is I also have to adjust the fact that because of my Asperger's, I'm a natural introvert. And learning how to deal with groups of people and that type of thing is something I'm forcing myself to do things that are not typical to me because of this climate change debate. So no, I haven't reached out to other chapters. And quite honestly, every time I reach out to organizations, they either don't listen to me, they laugh at me, they think I'm nuts, or they I get the same treatment as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when she first started launching her campaign. So I kind of backed away from contacting groups and just kind of worked in the background and feeding the homeless, going to food banks, rescuing animals, and doing things as a private citizen. That's what every moment of my free time I'm on that, or on social media rescuing animals. If you go onto my Facebook page, you'll see that I do a lot of animal rescue on social media. So that's where I've been spending a majority of my time too. And plus, our oldest son was just diagnosed with autism, and he's been coming out with me, whenever we go and do things. So, I haven't done that yet. But if there's a group that'll listen to me that I can go to and talk to, I will talk to anybody about this. My goal is to.
I'm not really familiar with what the lines of the seventh are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really just becoming familiar with the lines of the fifth, truth be told. But if it's near or a part of Bucks or Montgomery County at all, there is a DSA chapter there that you might want to think about talking to.
I'll reach out to them.
And I can put you in contact with them too.
Thank you.
But
I want to talk to whoever will listen. I feel like history is repeating itself, and we're facing, no joke, if an asteroid would have hit our planet in 12 years, we wouldn't be having the same incremental politics that we're having now.
no.
And we need to avoid the sixth massive extinction event on planet Earth. So I will talk to whoever I need to talk to be able to spread my message. Anybody. Yes.
Thumbs up. All right, cool. Well,
and America, by the way, this is my first interview, and thank you so much. I'm so honored to be doing my first interview. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me the time.
Yeah, I'm happy to give you the time and
thank you.
Have you on my show that has about 15 subscribers.
But you know what? It feels good to get involved, and those 15 subscribers watch your show. They know it's 15 subscribers, but it makes it feel like it's the whole world. And you have an opportunity, as I have an opportunity, to be able to spread your message on social media and the shared economy. So those 15 subscribers are going to tremendously grow, and you're gonna have a huge audience. And it's the sort of thing where we're finding a way, and this is the way.
Yeah, basically.
Collaboration.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thanks. And all right.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.